What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Proverbial Life podcast. This is a podcast where we encourage Christians to look to Christ, live wisely, and leave a legacy behind for generations to follow. I am your host, Edwin, and if I was on Leaving a Legacy podcast, I'd say Edwin Anthony Ramirez, but otherwise known as Ear, but we're not going to go there. But yeah, man, so tonight I have a brother on tonight and super excited. Andre Perkins from the Puny Giant YouTube channel. I'm
Yes.
going to let him introduce himself and we're going to chop it up. We got a real good discussion tonight. So for those of you who are coming in, do me a favor. Please share this episode with your friends, your family, and your enemies. And we're going to get it in. It's going to be a real good topic. We're going to read the comments as well throughout this episode. So if you have any questions for Andrew or I, please let us know. All right, my brother, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Andre Perkins. I am a leading elder at Triad Bible Fellowship here in the Triad region of North Carolina and the Piedmont. And I'm a father, I'm a husband, and just someone who's really interested in trying to help the body of Christ work our way through some of these issues we've been dealing with in these days and times.
Yeah, that's good, brother. So I reached out to you and said, man, I'd love to have you on the podcast sometime. And you said, yeah, let's do it. And I said,
Yeah, man.
I said, what you want to talk about? What you want to chop it up about? And one of the things that you've been really dealing with a lot on your YouTube channel, the Puny Giant, you've been talking a lot about relationships and you've been talking about communication and the importance of that and the need for that in our lives as Christians. And so I shot some titles at you and you said, man, that sounds great. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is how we can disagree like men. Or how to disagree like men. So as we get started, man, let's define our terms. Let's talk about what it means to disagree. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and then let's just have a conversation on this topic and kind of just see where the Lord leads it.
Right. So, what it means to disagree. I would say that you have a different, you've drawn a different conclusion. That's usually what it involves. You've processed some sort of information, and you've come to a different conclusion from somebody else. That's probably the simplest definition I could give for what a disagreement is.
Okay. So in this disagreement, there is I'm gonna try to give some mental pictures here, right? So there's like this head butting, right? You think of like maybe not as like vigorous or forceful, but you think of like two rams butting heads.
Yeah.
Right. There's this combating, and again, not to think of the most like destroying someone, but just the physical act of, and it could be mental, right? So like we're dealing with ideas, and so there's this like this concept of iron sharpening iron, right? There's this pushback, there's this like tangling and wrestling, right? So that's good. So why? Okay, so so how to disagree. So we defined what it means to disagree. Why is it important that we disagree the right way?
Well, there are a number of reasons, obvious reasons, I think. Number one, if we're disagreeing about an issue, a problem, and that problem needs to be solved, that problem needs to be addressed. If we don't disagree in the right way, we're likely not draw a sound conclusion or reach a solution to the problem. It's honestly, kind of like what's been happening with our government lately, where they often don't disagree the right way, and what it causes is gridlock in the process in Washington, and a lot of times problems don't get solved. And the same thing can happen, with us as individuals, man to man, friend to friend, and obviously these things are happening in the church as well, where we get this gridlock because we're not disagreeing in the right way. There's a friendly way and a very amicable way that we can disagree. I was telling someone about, I was watching a movie, and in the movie, they had a fight on a ship. There were these sailors, and there was this enforcer sailor, this bully sailor, and he wanted a certain seat in the mess hall, and they were like no, so they got in a fight, and they fought, and then after they got done, they sat down and ate together. You know what I'm saying? And we're missing some of that. Obviously, we're not getting in, hopefully we're not getting in actual physical fisticuffs. But when we're dealing in the area of ideas, one of the things that I think gets in the way quite a bit is, I think I mentioned it in my first video. We often tend to conflate the person with the idea. We we often we hear the pushback against our idea, and we're either conflating that individual that's pushing back with the idea they're pushing back with, or we have personalized our idea to the point where we can't separate our emotions from it. And that often causes, friction. It causes problems. We start taking things personally, and before you know it, we're throwing ad hominem out there. We're attacking one another's character, that kind of thing. And usually when that happens, there's not much else that's going to be accomplished until you might need to back off, go to your separate corners, think about, what just happened, and maybe come back and apologize. Unfortunately, most of the time, it doesn't seem that happens. You have grudges, and we see that kind of thing happen in the world. It's especially disheartening when we see it happen in the church, because God has given us wisdom. Speaking of the proverbial life, God has given us the wisdom to be able to engage one another in a very peaceful, calm way, even when it comes to things that we vehemently disagree with. But yeah, I think that's a big problem, conflating people with ideas, and that causes us to not be able to move forward with the conversation. A really good goal should be to keep the conversation going.
That's good, man.
And one of the things that we can end up doing, well, I'll put it this way: one of the things we probably should do is think about what ways we can keep the conversation going.
That's good. Wow. Man, I that really is. You and I were talking before we started the episode, and I told you about a scenario that had taken place in my life a year ago, more or less. And it was an online discussion I had with someone, and it did not go well. And I look back in that moment on how I responded and how I felt, and I look back and I'm ashamed of how I held myself in that moment, or how I let that situation take me out of my character.
Right.
And maybe you could speak into this, man, because one of the things that I think about, that I feel like that was one of the defining points in my life that really helped me get to this place, and I'm still getting to this place where I feel comfortable enough with myself to disagree with someone and not to personalize it. Because we had talked about this, man, and this is what I want you to speak into. When we talk about, like, and so let me kind of talk about what I mean by comfortable with myself. When we think about one of the reasons why I think for men is, there's several reasons, but one of the reasons why we can often find ourselves not acting like men when it comes to our argumentation is oftentimes pride, right? So we got to be right even when we're wrong. The lack of humility and not making it right when we need to, which stems from pride. But then another thing is this deep insecurity that we can't really let anyone else know we have, because we're men, right? And we're strong, and we got a reputation, right? And we need to be perceived in a certain way by people who don't know us and will never meet, right?
Right.
So I would say for me, man, that was one of the things God used, although negative, He used for the good to help me see, like, yo, there was some lack of masculinity in how you dealt with that by personalizing things and then
Right.
getting in the flesh. And so,
Right.
what role do you think insecurities and those sorts of emotions play in how we deal with these kinds of disagreements and confrontations?
A huge role.
Yeah.
You're talking to someone who was probably the king of being insecure. You know, as I expressed uh, before we went live, you know, I'm an introvert. I really am. I like to stay private. I don't like confrontation.
Mm,
I don't. I get uncomfortable with it, you know. Um, but I will say that uh, age has helped out a
mm,
bit. Age has helped out a bit, and obviously maturity. I mean, because there are a lot of people. You've seen that meme with the little baby with the mustache. You know, this is what happens when you don't grow in Christ. When you,
yeah, I love
you
that
know,
meme,
yeah,
man.
yeah. So age does not guarantee maturity.
Right.
But there at one point, you know, it began to sink in for me, by God's grace, that I can't be too worried about myself. You
Yes.
know, I can't take myself so seriously.
Mm,
You know, we need to take the Lord seriously. We need to take the truth seriously. And when when it's all said and done, let God be true and every man be a liar. I mean, I'm not the arbiter of truth. I'm not the one who determines what's right and what's wrong. I need to look to Christ for
mm,
that. And if I'm standing on Christ in the midst of that, in the midst of those conversations, and I'm doing the best I can, the best I know how, I can go into it with a clear conscience and come out of it with a clear conscience, even if it appears that somebody made me look like a fool. um,
mm,
there's a bit of confidence that comes with understanding a couple of things. One, the sovereignty of God
mm,
in all of it. You get into a spat, and it seems like somebody handled you online. Obviously, humility has to come into play. Um,
sure.
but also, at some point, you have to remember that God is sovereign
Mm,
in it all. Not only in how people may view you, or how you handle the situation. Um, you know, we might talk a little more about this, but um, sometimes we're insecure about confronting someone. For example, faithful are the wounds of a friend,
mm,
and we can't be insecure and afraid about going into a particular conversation, or that may be confrontational, and be afraid of hurting someone. We need to give the truth um, as amiably as we can possibly, uh, as respectfully and gently as possible. Um, but we can't go into it being concerned about, how is that person going to think of me after this? And we need to understand in the midst of that. Now, that's obviously a concern, and that's sort of a motivating factor when it comes to how we deal with people, because we know that there are logical consequences.
yeah.
If we're a jerk to somebody, yeah, they're probably not going to like us. They're probably not going to want to fool with us. There's just natural logical consequences.
Sure.
So we do understand that. That's somewhat of a motivation. But at the same time, we do what we do, in our conversations if they have to be confrontational, if you're confronting an idea, especially if you're confronting someone in the area of a moral issue, a sin issue, we do it with gentleness and respect. And we do it as peacefully and as gently as we possibly can. And sometimes you can't do that. And, and I understand that, but the sovereignty of God plays a big role. And obviously our humility, our not thinking of ourselves more highly than what we ought to think. And that, again, it goes back to, not taking ourselves too seriously in a matter. We do want to, like I said, we want to take God's word seriously. We want to take our handling of his word seriously. We want to take issues, especially important issues, seriously as we're having these conversations. But not to put ourselves on that pedestal to the place where we feel like, oh no, if I fall off, we can't do that. So we have to go into a situation humbly and also, realize we're wrestling with ideas. We're wrestling with ideas primarily. Sometimes it may become a wrestling match with an individual. But as long as we can keep it in the realm of ideas, I think we can manage.
No, that's good, brother. I think of Paul's words where he says, act like men, right?
Mm-hmm.
I tried to find the verse. I think it's 1 Corinthians 16:13. Be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. And then I think it's, if that's not the right verse, there's a verse in, I think it might be 1 Corinthians 15. Anyway, that passage where Paul talks about the importance of acting like men. Mm-hmm. And as men, because that's, when we talk about this topic tonight, we're talking about how to disagree like men. Men take initiative, men take mm-hmm. responsibility, men take mm-hmm. charge, men are to be leaders. There to set examples, and if we are, if we are insecure, that means we're looking too much at ourselves and not to Christ. Right. It means that we are overly concerned with our own image, and our own popularity or whatever it is.
Right.
We think we somebody, and really that's a dope cup. Where'd you get that cup from?
I got it from some wise brother,
What a lovely cup. But we need to as fathers, right, setting examples for our children.
Yes.
On, there's a way in which you two I have 3 kids, so you 2 or you 3 can disagree with one another without throwing blows. Right. And so as the husband, as their father, as a Christian, as a leader, as someone who preaches at my church, I need to also, I'm not perfect, but lay that groundwork down on, look, this is how you man up.
Yeah.
Right. And so with that, man, let me say this. Let me pick your brain on this. So where if anywhere, right? You and I know we're very familiar with AD Robles.
Yeah, man.
we want to spice things up a little bit.
Yeah.
So where does this concept or this idea of going out of our way at times to make our opponents upset to draw out a problem that needs to be highlighted?
Proverbs. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Because while you're pulling that up, because a year ago, when I think of where I'm at now, a year ago, if I had a conflict with someone, my resolve would be, I'm done. I'm getting off of Facebook for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, but that doesn't mean I don't need to examine myself. But that also doesn't mean I need to throw in the towel every time there's some confrontation that I felt like maybe I act the fool in, or maybe I said things harshly that needed to be said, but in my conscience, I just couldn't. I couldn't reconcile that. Right.
Right. We actually have a responsibility, and I'm preaching to myself, and I'm I'm stepping on my own toes right now,
Come on.
because this is something that I've often balked at, but I've thank God I'm growing in this area and being able to practice this. But it's somewhat of a when you read it at first blush, it's somewhat confusing. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So let's chop it up about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where the dividing line is, where you decide, okay, when do I engage? There's a time when we should certainly yell as was it Rhodey, the War Machine, canopy, 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 get me out of here. There's definitely a time to do that, but there's also a time when we sort of have a responsibility to show that other individual where they've gone wrong, where
Yeah.
they have fallen into folly.
Yes.
If we love them, we need to put in that emotional, or that emotional work
Yeah.
to show them where they have erred.
Yeah.
So if it's a matter of, and I'll try to bring it, and you help me out with this.
Sure.
If it's a matter of just trying to find a practical application, let's say you're having a conversation online, and an individual is perhaps in error about some information. It could be a doctrine, it could be a study, it could statistics, whatever the case may be. That is a time, especially if you see that their error is something along the lines of them just not thinking rightly about it, maybe not interpreting it right, maybe not thinking logically. That's an opportunity for us to step in and say, okay, let's talk about this. That's when you answer, if that person is being foolish in their estimations of a thing, that's when you answer someone according to their folly, lest they be wise in their own eyes. On the flip side, though, so I prefer smooth AT. Yeah, that's the first thing I talked about in my first video. So I don't like to keep it spicy, but he does, and I appreciate that. Because there's definitely a time for it.
Yeah.
And he does it well. But there's also a time when you don't need to answer a fool according to his folly. And one of the applications that I've assumed would be the case is when you're talking to someone and they just start attacking your character from the outset. They just start, ad hominem, and they're just calling you names and all of that stuff. Now, there are times, there's a time when hopefully you can put the fire out and be like, hey, man, especially if you're dealing. It's one thing if you're dealing with people in the world, but if you're dealing with a brother or sister in Christ and they're doing that, then there's a time when you need to say, hey, why are you doing this? Aren't we brothers? And if they, insist on, continuing that line of, conversation, then it's no longer a conversation at that point.
Yeah.
But that's the dividing line that I see in terms of application of that passage. Help me out. What you think about that?
Yeah, that's good, man. So I think there's levels, man. So like online, I see a bunch of stuff, right? I'll see some false doctrine being said from some random person I like let be my friend for some reason. You know what I mean? Like I don't even know why. Like, and I really even just like learned how to filter all that out. Like if I because how they have like mutual friend, like 121 mutual friends. And so I go to that mutual friend, and if I don't see like 5 people that I know are reliable on their mutual friends list, I ain't rocking with them.
Yeah, I'm doing
Where
that too.
before I used to be like, oh, 151 people. Well, those were 150 people. I'd have messed up 150 people
Right.
to go on. So,
I got my anchor mutual friends.
come on, man.
Yeah.
So I use a lot more discernment and wisdom now because I've been
Right.
getting a lot of friend requests. So I have to be really wise, right? So
Right.
some and so with somebody online, man, you know, I think this is why the local church is so important and why people need to be in the local church, because social media isn't the church,
It's not.
right?
Yeah.
And although universally we are the church, this isn't the church, and so I can't watch your life. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I don't know you. I
Right.
know of you. You know what I'm saying? Like you and I, this is our first time like virtually
Yeah.
seeing each other face to
Yeah.
face and
Yeah.
chopping it up. But even with you and I, we've had interactions
Right.
beyond other people. So I would even have you in a different sphere than I would other people. You know what I mean?
Right.
So when it comes to all the craziness I see on people's site, on their page, most of that stuff, I'm like, I need to either unfriend him or just ignore that craziness, right? And so I think that's wisdom and not wasting your time, you know?
Right. Right.
And then if it's like, let's say you or another brother says something that I disagree with, if it's not a big deal, then I wouldn't even go publicly and say, but if it was a big deal, I'd say, hey brother, can you clarify? Or I'd even private message you. I
Right.
private
Right.
message you, be like, yo,
Yeah.
what do you mean by this, brother? So that's kind of how I would deal with those things. So, but when it comes to someone who's antagonistic,
Yeah.
or is just saying stupid stuff that is bringing division in the church, right? Or that is heretical, I use a different grid because, if this person is a blue check, right, and
Uh-huh.
they're saying something, they have like major influence.
Right.
Like I don't have any problem whatsoever, like not being smooth AD. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
calling them out.
Yeah.
Because there are people who are believing their ideas, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
who are applying their ideas. If it's so anyway, that's kind of my grid. Answer a fool according to his folly, right?
Right.
So I'm being like Elijah. Like if it's
Yeah.
a false brethren or someone who is showing themselves to be apostate, and
Right.
they're not at that place where they're repentive and wanting to come back and they want to interact with me, then at some place in there, I don't mind mocking and be like, nah, bro, like what you talking like that? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So
And
there's degrees
yeah.
to that.
And one thing I like to say is that I mentioned jumping out of the conversation, and that's not always necessary. As a matter of fact, most of the time, it's probably not the action we should take when it comes to the fool. And the need to not answer them according to their folly doesn't mean we don't need to answer them. We just don't need to answer them the way that they're dealing with us in foolishness. So I think that puts on us even another responsibility to respond, even if it means rebuke.
Yeah, and again, when a Christian can be acting foolishly, but I don't think a Christian is necessarily a
A
fool.
fool, right?
Right?
Right.
I think of that passage in Corinthians where it says, not to be carnal. I don't think a Christian can be carnal. I think a Christian can be acting carnal. I think carnal has to do with the flesh, and we're no longer in the flesh, right? Because we're in the spirit. I think we can act fleshly. I think we can act carnally, and I think people can act foolish and say foolish things. But I think by nature, our characteristic isn't identified as the fool.
The
And
fool,
so,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I think the fool is the antagonistic, who's opposed to Christianity, who's mocking, who's a scoffer in Second Peter. So those people need to be like as a matter of fact, this happened to me recently. There's a guy on my Facebook page. My dude straight attacked my character and straight like called out my manhood.
Yeah.
So I put Satan's head on the stick, and I straight publicized it because I had gone to him privately. I had spoken to him in the past. You know what I'm saying? He had apologized to me. Thank you, buddy. And all those things. You want to say hi to everybody? My man, my little
What's up?
arrow. You're on TV, buddy. All 4 people are watching you. I'll see you. Okay. Good night. Love you. So like in that situation, I want this to be on blast
Right.
because I want everyone to see this foolishness. Now I got a lot of pushback from that from people.
Yeah.
But it was good because there was another person that came out and basically said he hated me. I
Yeah.
didn't even know this dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I answered the fool, but I didn't continue in that conversation.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So another thing, man, speaking to this, bro. I think we should let me ask you the question before I answer my own question.
Okay.
How do you deal with situations in which you have failed in communicating well? Like that temptation to condemn yourself, to beat yourself up, and that transfer into, well, then just forget about it. Like I'm not going to do. How do
Yeah.
you do? Because we're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to
Right.
say it right.
Right.
But not getting it right and not saying it right, should that mean that we don't do it at all, or how do we deal with that?
Yeah. One thing that I've by God's grace have learned to do is uh, to just be honest about myself and about my actions, about my words. Um, and obviously that kind of thing, there's a good deal of what we're talking about right now that pertains to online interactions and conversations. But it pertains to every, area of life. There are times when I have to, go to my wife and be like, hey, um, I'm sorry, said that way, or I was wrong and I did not know, and that kind of thing. Um, and it goes back to not thinking of ourselves more highly than what we ought to think. Understanding that that we're human, we're still um, wrestling with this fallen flesh, that wars against the spirit, every single day. And as it pertains to online, I've hit PMs a lot. Like when I see something go south, and I get this feeling as I'm reading Greg Kokel, Tactics. There are a lot of things that he's saying. I'm like, man, that makes so much sense.
The Columbo tactic.
The Columbo tactic. There are things that really resonate, with me, and it's like, yeah, I get that. I haven't, put one and one together to make two, with this particular thing. But now that he's putting it together, I'm like, yeah, that makes so much sense. One of the things that really resonated with me, and I kind of felt it, but I hadn't heard anybody verbalize it this way, and it depends on the kind of interaction, obviously. And a lot of the interactions he's dealing with are interactions with atheists. If you read the book, that he deals with a lot of interactions with atheists. But these principles, apply to many interactions, especially those that that are antagonistic in nature. They can apply to people, brothers and sisters in Christ. Quite honestly.
Yeah.
But one thing that he said near the beginning of it was that if somebody has gotten mad, then everybody loses. And it's like, wow, yeah, because and I see that because when it happens on the internet, as an example, almost every time that conversation just goes down, down, down.
People stop listening.
They stop listening because it's public in nature. It becomes a public debate, and then people are trying to save face, and be right and all that stuff. And there are many times where I've I gotten an online spat, if you will. And, to this moment, I don't think it was, it was my fault, but I saw it going down and I saw a little bit of animus, developing. So I went to the dude's private message and I was like, hey, man, what's going on, and even, conceded some, some things, maybe I did something, whatever. I just, want to clear the air here. What's going on? And, unfortunately, a lot of times, it doesn't work. A lot of times you get the, and I even had, and this kind of speaks to something that you said earlier. I had one guy, I went to his private message because it was getting, antagonistic on, in public. So I went to private because I'm thinking about the body. I'm thinking about, because this was a professing believer. I'm thinking about, what Jesus said, the world will know us because of our love for one another. I'm thinking about, 1 John chapter 2, I'm thinking about these things. And PM is often a better way to squash it. And that's definitely one of my go-tos. When I try to squash something, I definitely go to the PM. But I'm thinking about these things, and I'm thinking about the testimony that this conversation is to the world publicly. And I'm like, okay, this is back off. Let me go to the private messages. And that's one of the things that I definitely do. And I'm thinking about, again, the body of Christ. I'm not thinking about myself, because myself, I want to, tell him, how right I am. I want to, prove to him how wrong he is. At some point, I got to let that go. And if it's not a gospel, essential issue that needs to be addressed, at some point, I need to let that go and come back another time. Maybe on a better day, maybe when they're in a better mood, maybe when I'm in a better mood. But definitely going to private messages has been a go-to for me, and I've done it quite a bit. And sometimes I come back, with egg on my face, and I say, okay, well, God is sovereign. Lord, help me and help him.
Yeah, that's good, man. There was a message I got from someone, and they were inviting me to have a conversation that was going to be an opposing. It was going to be, we were not going to agree at all.
Right.
And I legitimately could not meet for this. I could not join this meeting. I had other plans. So I made a suggestion of another one or two individuals that I had in mind that would also represent the position that I adhere to,
right,
in this conversation. And so what ended up happening was they reached out to one of two of the people that I suggested. And neither of those individuals, so that individual that was reached out to couldn't do the conversation either.
Mm-hmm.
Well, only to find out that it was actually a panel of people, 5 people, and no one representing the other opposing view. And so what I found out was this was a setup.
Yeah.
This was a setup.
Yeah.
And so I praise God that I actually had plans. But one thing I thank God for, and this is why I'm bringing this up, is the Lord really, I felt that in my spirit, without
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like, this ain't right.
Yeah,
I really want to have this conversation, but something ain't right about this. And then it was confirmed when, the people I suggested, they didn't really want them. Like they wanted me. And
right.
this was going to be like a lynching party. You know what I'm saying? And so, so those kind of scenarios, I think, we have to use wisdom and discernment on the conversations that we're having publicly, and whether or not, we should be in control as to whether or not we want to involve ourselves in that conversation publicly. Because although it it would I could have done that, right, and it probably would have been really bad, right? Like it really, I would have put myself in a bad position, put myself, so talk about, man, all that being said, talk about, like, we don't need to be in every conversation. We don't need to win every person over, right? Or even have everyone like us or agree with us. Like there are conversations that we can just kind of let go and, like, say, I'm good, thank you for the offer, but no thank you. I don't want to have that conversation with you, right? Or with you on this topic.
Right.
So any thoughts on that?
Sovereignty of God.
Yeah, there you go, man.
I know I keep pointing to that, but I mean, honestly, like, have confidence in God's sovereignty. Understand that God has given us wisdom to live by, and we need to go and live by that wisdom, live according to that wisdom, and God is sovereign over it all. So we don't have to involve ourselves in everything. There was a time when I felt like I had to, like, interject in every online conversation that I came across, and I thought, man, they're not getting this right. They're not getting this right. You got to realize, you know what? I start playing. I'm not the greatest chess player. I do know how to play chess.
Okay.
But I start going move after move, and I'm thinking, yeah, I kind of see where this is probably going to go.
Hey, come, come see me on chess.com, baby.
You will slaughter me right now.
I don't know.
The last time I played chess was with my family on vacation last year, so it's been a while. But yeah, I try to be wise, like you said, and it really behooves us to handle those situations wisely, to not throw ourselves into every single conversation. Don't feel the need to do that, but certainly if you feel a conviction to do it, you probably need to jump in. If that conviction is strong and you've thought about it, and it's not one of those uneasy situations that like what you said, you felt it in your spirit, and sometimes we're going to feel that we're going to be like, I don't know if this will be a good one to jump into, and we need to listen to that. We need to listen to our conscience on these matters. So yeah, that's something that I had to learn. I see some foolish stuff, as we all do, and a lot of it used to be scroll stop, now it's just kind of yep, yep, no, yep, no.
That's that growth. That's that Holy Ghost growth.
You would notice that I shaved my beard the other day. I had a bit of gray in there, not as much as you, but
I'm not where I need to be, Lord. But I'm not where I want to be. But I'm not where I used to be.
Exactly.
Come on,
I'm not.
Lord.
Thank God. God. But yeah, God's sovereignty, trusting in God's sovereignty, trusting that, even in those conversations, as you know, one of the things that Greg Kokel touches on is that, he's had situations where he didn't get an opportunity to get to the gospel. And he talks about, closers. There are certain people who are closers and certain people who may not be closers. All the while, God is using people to plant and to water and to close and to pluck, so we have to understand that not every, opportunity, we can't force it, if you will, a lot of times. And sometimes we can do that. If the opportunity is there, by all means, take it. But we can't force the issue, whether it be the gospel, whether it be anything else. Sometimes we just need to, as Kokel puts it, just put a pebble in their shoe. Give them something to think about, and leave it at that, and smile and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, give them something to think about.
Yeah. No, that's good, brother. So for those of you who are watching, I'm having a conversation with my brother, the Puny Giant. Go check out his YouTube channel, the Puny Giant. There's a video you just recorded, brother, about a week ago called Compassionately Dispassionate. And in there you quoted, I believe it was Walter Williams, or it might have been Thomas Sowell.
It was
But
Walter Williams.
it was Walter Williams. Okay. And I want you to explain this. It says, compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis.
Okay.
Explain that.
So, for those who aren't aware, and I know probably a good deal of your audience probably is, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell are two of the greatest economists of our time.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly, both of them are black men, and they're, what is Walter Williams? Is he in his 80s?
At least, yeah.
Yeah, and Thomas Sowell, I believe he just turned 91 or 92,
90,
something
yeah.
like that. Yeah, so they're up in age, and they're still, you know, still contributing to the cultural conversations. And Walter Williams wrote an article in tribute to Thomas Sowell because it was his birthday, and in that article he said that Thomas Sowell cares about people. And one of the ways he went on to elaborate, and he basically said, compassionate policy requires dispassionate analysis. So whenever we're looking to solve a problem and we're looking to express compassion with our solving of that problem, we have to analyze all of the components of that problem without letting our emotions take control. You know, and we, as we can see right now in our culture and society, to a degree, even in the church, that's easier said than done. A lot of times it's easier said than done, but it's something that actually must be done. I'll never forget another great quote, and I might not quote him verbatim, but Abraham Hamilton III. I really like him, and he basically said that emotions make for horrible generals, but they're excellent foot soldiers. You know, and it's like, yeah, that's true. You can't lead with your emotions. You can't let your emotions take control of you when you're dealing with a problem. And one of the areas in which this is, you know, relevant is the issues we're dealing with in our culture today.
Yeah.
You know, you see a lot of back and forth. You know, you've got the people who want to say, okay, well, this is my experience and this is the experience of these people. And they, you know, they make that the determining factor for what must be done in a situation. But then you have another side of people that says, well, this is what the data says, and this is what the statistics say, and they make that the sole determining factor of you know, what we need to do in a situation. The disconnect oftentimes is that the statistics represent people. And that's often the disconnect. And so, you know, you get one side that gets upset. They say, oh, all you want to talk about is statistics, and you just throw up your statistics. And then the other side says, no, your experience not the only. No, you know, the statistics always point to some anecdotal. And so what we have to do is we have to come together with that. And in order to really figure out what's going on, yeah, we can take the anecdotal and understand that, yeah, these statistics represent a person. We need to let that desire to honor the Imago Dei in those individuals, let that drive us, but not lead us. You know, that needs to be the fuel that fuels the vehicle toward finding a problem. But, you know, when we put fuel in a car, we put it in the fuel tank. We don't pour it in the cockpit in the cabin. We don't do that. It doesn't function right there. As a matter of fact, it's going to be more distraction and probably harmful. And before you know it, the car might catch on fire,
Right.
somebody, so you got to put those emotions in the right place. And you don't look at it just completely emotionless. You don't look at an issue emotionless, but you can't let your emotions lead you in trying to figure out a solution to the problem. So one thing that guys like Walter Williams and Thomas Soule and others have been excellent at doing is taking a look at the data, recognizing that it represents human beings, and saying, okay, I'm looking at this data, this is what it says. And this is what I believe is best based on what it says. And it's not about, a political party or anything like that. It's about seeking to do what's best for an individual based on the information that we have about the problem. And we, when we let our emotions rule us, we don't think clearly. I was talking to my brother, and at some point, I think we're going to start a podcast. I presented the opportunity because he's you know, I'm gonna brag on him a little bit. He's a really good mathematical financial mind, and he works in that field. So, I was talking to him about this particular quote, and he mentioned something that he and his wife is a wonderful lady, godly lady, very wise and intelligent. And they mentioned something to me about the amygdala, okay, which is a part of the brain that controls emotions. And I had heard about it, I never really gave much thought to it because I've been in, the medical field, in the military. I've had to take anatomy, physiology. I went to school. I started going to school for, PE, to be a personal trainer or a PE teacher or something like that. So I've had dealings in biology and anatomy, physiology. So I've definitely heard the term, just hadn't dealt with it. I really hadn't had a need to working in the computer field. So, but the amygdala is the part of the brain that handles that kind of deals with emotions. And there's a term. After we talked about that, I was like, yeah, let me look into that. He told me to do a Google search. I looked into it, and one term that I found was amygdala hijacking. And what happens is the amygdala sometimes can hijack the brain to where I believe it's the frontal lobe that handles, the processing and decision making and all that stuff. It can hijack it, and you start to make irrational decisions. And so when we get to a place where we let our emotions control us, we don't make the best decisions. We simply don't. We don't process the way we ought to. There's definitely a philosophical and spiritual aspect to this. And it really, one of the evidences of that is how it affects us physically and how it can hinder our ability to actually think things through. And this, I'm sure you've seen it. We've all seen it. People make some foolish decisions when they get in their emotions, man.
Yeah.
They really do. So, as much as we can control our emotions, it would serve us well, especially when we run across some, a problem and we get some information about the problem, and okay, it doesn't sit well, but let me think about this.
Yeah.
Let me take all the information I can get. Let me process it calmly and rationally. I know that, okay, that I understand, it's kind of like having the fussy kid, and you're trying to pay for food or something like that. And the kid is really hungry, and you're like, okay, I understand that, but I got to count this money right now. I know you're hungry. I hear you. I feel that. At the same time, I still got to handle this business in front of me, and I can't handle it the same way that I would handle you in order to get it done properly. So
that's good, brother. Yeah.
That was a lot, but yeah, that's pretty much what it's about.
That's good, man. Yeah, it's I think of Satan's arrows, right? Those fiery darts that he throws in our direction. If we don't have on the shield of faith, right, then those arrows will penetrate our heart, our emotions, the seat of our emotions, right?
Yes.
And this is the temptation that he brought to our first parents, right? He wanted them to think with their emotions rather than to obey what God said.
Right.
Right. So the question is, hath God said? Did
Uh-huh.
God really mean by what he said?
Right.
Like, no, he didn't. Look at this fruit. Like, look how great it is. And it says, when she saw how, I forget exact phraseology, that it was appealing to the eyes and to the flesh,
Right.
and she took upon it to eat, and then she gave it to her husband. So I think and we see this perfectly, right, in the person of Christ,
Yeah.
how he was always in control of his emotions,
Mm-hmm.
even when he was angry, he was perfect in his anger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even we think of, I've heard people blasphemously say that the Black Lives Matter movement and
Yeah.
the protests were a picture of Jesus turning over the
Jesus turned it.
tables.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't get the chance to really address that because there was so much
Yeah.
going on. But that wasn't Jesus kind of emo, uh, non he wasn't emotionally responding without
Right.
reason. Like
Right.
he had contemplated that for some time. Like, it took him some time to make the whip that he was making, and
Uh-huh.
and the picture is that he had seen this go on, and his patience wore out, and for the love of his father's house, enough was enough,
Yeah.
right? So it was righteous indignation. And I
Right.
think there are times when we can respond, although in our quote unquote righteous indignation, because let's be honest, right, like our righteous indignation oftentimes is mingled with sin, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it isn't like there is us in that process, like, oh, homie
Yeah.
came at me, like, where'd
Yeah.
you go, and so in the name of righteous indignation, I'm gonna do this. But you know in our righteous indignation, sin is mingled in with it. But
Uh-huh.
with Christ's righteous indignation, there's no sin in it, right?
Right.
And so when we look to Christ, we see, okay, what did Christ get angry about? Why did he get angry? How did he respond? and
Respond.
and
Yeah.
how and how can we learn from that and seek to emulate his life in that?
Yeah. And one of the things that I did deal with in that last video I did was along those lines. Um, it's a passage, um, James
Yeah,
chapter 1, I believe.
19 to
Um,
20. Yep.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And be quick to listen, slow to speak,
Yep.
and slow to anger. Doesn't mean you're not going to get angry at some point.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you can't be angry at some point. We just need to make sure when we get angry, we take that slow roll
Yep.
and make sure when we do respond in anger, it is righteous indignation.
Yep.
It's a slow roll, the quick to listen. Listen, let's take in all the information that we can take in about the situation. Slow to speak. Don't feel anxious. Kind of, hearkening back to something we said previously. Don't feel
Yep.
anxious to give an answer. You
Mhm.
don't have to give an answer necessarily. You do it when you've had an opportunity, to think about it.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but I just came to my mind thinking
Uh,
this has been an encouragement for me too, man. I don't always need to respond to everything, obviously.
right.
I don't always need to say things. I'm not always going to say things the right way. But as Christians, what we can go back to is the resurrection of Christ, right? Is the death,
Uh-huh.
burial, and resurrection of Christ, because he said it is finished.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
all things
Exactly.
in Christ have been
Yeah.
accomplished,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
so we can find comfort in, dang man, I dropped the ball again. I didn't say the right thing. But
Right.
but look to Christ, right?
Exactly.
It is
Exactly.
finished.
To tell us that.
Come on, Lord.
Exactly.
Come on, man.
That is right. That is right.
Like, that's our comfort, man. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but that just
Oh
came
no,
to
you're
mind.
fine. Yeah. That's awesome. And that we need to remember that. That's where the gospel ministers to us every single day. There's this idea that, maybe for some churches, some Christians, that we need to move past the gospel. We need to mature beyond. No, the gospel is what we need every
Yes.
single day. And it has broad, transcendent ramifications in every area of life, even those situations that you just talked about, where we feel like we messed up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm forgiven and God is sovereign.
Yes.
Help
Amen. Amen.
me, Lord, for my next engagement. Help me, Lord, with help,
Yes.
and each one of those situations, if we're paying attention and we're walking circumspectly as we ought to be, um, we're going to learn from it.
Yeah.
And it is one of those Romans 8:28 moments.
Mm.
All things work together for good to them that love God, who are called according to his purpose. And we know that ultimate purpose is his glory,
Yeah.
and to be conformed to the image of Christ. So we can definitely take comfort. And honestly, when I found myself in situations like that where I messed up and was like, man, I really messed that up. Well, Lord, I guess I know what to do next time, and I thank you, in the midst of that experience, because I know that all things work together for good to them that love
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
and it's a sanctifying thing if we're paying attention.
Yeah, man, that's good, brother. Andre, man, it's been great chopping it up with you, bro.
Yeah,
Uh,
man. Thanks for
had a
having me.
blast. Had a blast, man. So much more I want to talk with you about on this topic because it's important, man. It's
It
important that
is.
we we're made in the image of Christ in the Imago Dei, right, and image of God, and we're to reflect Him, and yeah. So there's a lot to be said.
There is,
Uh,
man. There is,
you
and
know,
and, and it's important. We're at. I don't know if we're at a crossroads. Maybe we've already passed the crossroads. I don't know. Um, but we're at a point in the church, especially right now, and this is a a phenomenon, that's across the culture at large. It's evident, but certainly, in the church we see it, where there is strong division.
yeah,
Um, you know, who's causing it? Yeah, we can talk about that, but
sure,
that's another conversation. It's
yep,
there, and it's important that we learn how to love one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. And one of the ways that we've neglected to a great degree is loving one another in our very conversations. In our
yeah,
conversations. And I think that's important. I don't see another way beyond this divide that we have right now, outside of us looking to Christ together, and actually having conversations with one another, actually conversing, reasoning with one another, and loving one another with the love of Christ,
mhm,
in our conversations. I think that's what we're going to need to do that. Obviously, it's going to take a work of God to
mhm,
accomplish this in the church. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm glad you had me on to talk about this, because it is important for the body of Christ to consider. And as we move forward in this current dilemma that we're facing in the church and in the culture, we
yeah.
can be
No,
an example. We can be an example for everyone.
that's good. No, that's good, brother. And man, even with that, so you're gonna make me go into another hour here because I think um I agree, and this is where we disagree like men here.
Okay.
I agree. The only thing I would say with that, along with that, is how because when we talk about love, um, obviously that's a buzzword that
Right.
people can use wrongly,
Hmm.
and yet we know what love is, right? Like
Hmm.
we see that, like the love of God is in our hearts, right?
Right.
The Spirit of God. So if we're believers, we know what that looks like. But I because what I'm thinking about is that person who says like, well, like like why do any like videos, like why don't you just reach out to JD Greer privately, or like to these
Yeah.
people, and like don't do that publicly because the world is watching,
Right.
or
Right.
you know what I mean? So like love when we look at even First Corinthians, right, when we talk about love is patient, love is kind,
Right. Right.
love does not envy or boast, It isn't arrogant. It's not rude. So there's truth, right? We need to examine ourselves and all that. It does not insist in its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing. So with that, but rejoices in the truth. So when there is lies, and people's minds are being captive, the loving thing to do
is to rebuke.
I
don't think we're disagreeing.
Okay. I guess not to disagree. Yeah. I wanted to add that caveat in there.
Yeah, that's important. It's important.
Even, man, even with the preaching, right? Like the ministry of preaching the gospel, Paul says, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with all long suffering and doctrine, right? Like there's this like confrontation, like this is what thus saith the Lord.
Right.
This is how you're living. This is what God says. Repent, right? Unbelievers, kiss the Son or perish, right? Like,
yep, exactly.
So I think when we talk about love, man, and I know that, as we talk, we don't disagree on it, but I think that's something that, because unbelievers hear that, or even immature believers, and they're like, "See, that's not loving."
Yeah, right. Yeah, one of the first lessons that that an old evangelist, he was my first mentor, and he was an incredibly wise man of God, and he didn't have seminary education. As a matter of fact, he didn't finish high school, and by the time I got to him, he was in his late 70s, early 80s. And I was still, I think I was still in my late 20s or something like that. And one of the first things he taught us, me and my wife, and maybe one or two other people that went to his Bible study, was that he quoted, I can't remember who it was. It was a Focus on the Family book. Sometimes love must be tough. Sometimes love must be tough, and I've definitely received my share of tough love, and it's necessary. So I'm glad you brought that up. And there's a right way to do it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's still not pleasant.
Yeah.
And it's not pleasant to watch.
Yeah.
But even in that, there's an opportunity for the world to see the right way to do it.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity, and we need to. And I'm not saying nobody in the church is doing it. There are plenty of people that are doing it right. I appreciate our brother AD, in the way he does it. But I think there are a lot of people who really need to look to Christ and look to the scriptures to find out if that needs to be done, how we need to do it.
Yeah.
And be an example to the world to follow in that way.
Yeah. And that's good, brother. You made me think of something else. Speaking of AD, you getting shout out on here. If you ever watch this, you're getting shout outs. But I had someone reach out to me about AD, and they said, hey, what do you think about this that AD does, when he calls out people and this and this and that. And I said to them, I said, everyone's different, right? So like we all got different gifts, we all got different talents, all that, right? Like we all have different personalities, right? We've all got that thing. Every Christian is in a war. Yeah. Like we're in a spiritual war. You've been enlisted in God's army, right? Yep. When you were born from above, when the Spirit of God regenerated you, and a part of that discipleship by the Spirit is teaching you God's word, teaching you how to pray, teaching, right? And it's equipping you. You have the full armor of God. Now you're learning how to use it, all this and that. But you're in a war. Yeah. And you either are going to not fight, right? And still be a casualty in this war, because Satan's not like, I bet he's not going to fight, so I'm not going to throw these arrows at him. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you're in a war. So how I answered this person says, look, man, like AD's fighting a fight that we're all in, whether or not we're actively fighting. It all affects us. Some people are on the front line. Some people are on the other, and what one person does in the war may not look the same way that we would do in the war. But we need to be fighting. right?
Exactly. Yeah.
To some capacity, whether it be through prayer, whether it be through financial support, whether it be through using our platforms,
Right.
but we need to know the lines, and we need to know whether or not those lines are worth crossing, and
Right.
when and if they are, then for the sake of truth, we need to cross them boldly and courageously.
Yep. Yep. You're right. You're absolutely right. And a good part of that is recognizing that we are soldiers in a war. Recognizing also, and this is where discipleship comes into play, and obviously discernment, recognizing what our giftedness is in that
Yes.
war.
Yes.
And what roles we can play. There was an interaction on I believe it was Seiko's webpage, Facebook page, and I can't remember if it was his or somebody else, and we were just all discussing it. And I made a comment. I was like, yeah, I said, if we're in one room, you'd be in one corner. I said, I think we'd be the odd couple. You'd be in one corner telling it like it is, and I'd be in another corner contemplating why it is what it is,
Yeah.
and we'd be doing it together,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
all have different, gifts and appointments in the
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why, when I came back to social media, because I took about a month off,
Mhm.
I came back with a determination to do exactly what we're talking about right
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
to try to contribute in that way.
Yeah, that's good, brother. All right, we're gonna
So we
shut it.
got to finish it.
Hey,
Yeah.
you know what I was thinking? I was like, this is why Joe Rogan's podcast is so
It
long.
goes. Yeah, it
It's
is,
because
man. It
he just
is.
have a conversation with people and you just get it in.
Oh yeah.
You
Oh yeah.
know. So again, man, Andre Perkins, the Puny Giant. Please subscribe to his channel, man. A lot of the things we talked about tonight is really what Andre is really dealing with and confronting, and I really appreciate. I saw several of your videos, man. I really appreciate them, brother. I love the, your infant stage to YouTube. I love
Yeah.
seeing that.
Yeah.
And but the content isn't infant at all. Like
Yeah.
the content is
Great
great. So I just want to encourage you with that, bro. Keep putting out videos. Keep communicating what God is giving you to communicate from your perspective, because it's really helpful, and it's something that, this is another thing I was thinking about. The, there are so many things we need to be talking about as believers,
Yeah.
that even this social justice thing is a distraction from us talking about other things. Like this is one of the battles, but
Yeah.
there's others fears. Like one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, that I want to touch on the social justice thing because of my experience and my background in it.
Right.
But there's a lot of like doctrine and theology and discipleship that people need, like,
Yeah.
because once you leave this woke stuff, like, then what?
Yeah.
Like, because
Yeah.
somewhere in that, like, you're misreading the Bible. Like
Yeah.
like your hermeneutics is jacked up, and your point of application is jacked up. So like we need solid material on those topics as well.
Yeah. That's right.
So how we deal with our emotions, all that. So anyway, man, just keep doing what you're doing, bro. I love it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Man,
just and this is going to what you said. Let's just make these videos that you make a little closer in time.
yeah. No. I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
It's all good, man.
Yeah.
It's all good. And over time, man, they just accumulate,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just realized that a year ago to date was when I started the Proverbial Life podcast on Anchor. And man, I went from zero to I have over 4,000 listeners.
Wow.
People who have listened. So it's just little by little, man. You get better and you get more proficient in communicating. So I love you, man. I appreciate you, bro. Any final words?
Man.
Anything you want to share? Where can people find you if you want to be found?
Yeah. I guess the best place to look for me is on YouTube right now.
Okay.
Look, the Puny Giant channel.
Okay.
And final words. Honestly, as I've said in my videos, at the end of each one, let all of us decrease so that He might increase.
Amen, brother. Amen. All right, y'all. This has been the Proverbial Life podcast where we encourage Christians to look to Christ, live wisely, and leave a legacy behind for generations to follow. God bless y'all. Until next time, grace and peace.